Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse. You're on the Bible Forum. We're looking at corporate religious apostasy. Well, it's not what you think. There have been two notable illustrations featured in the news just this week about the same thing. And that thing is sexual abuse. You'd have to be living in a van down by the creek with no communication to not know that. One was a media mogul. We've come to accept that one. But the other was a Roman Catholic priest, a cardinal. And he's the second one from the United States who's had to lose his job because of sexual abuse. Years ago, these guys are old, but when they were young, they were involved. At the same time, we have TV programming, we have internet opportunities, and a host of print media, music, and movies that spew immorality like this as if it were normal. Oh, wait. It is! Ordinary people, some of them claiming to be Christians, are wearing less and less clothing, acting out in sexually suggestive ways, using risque language, watching more sexually explicit television and video and internet programs, becoming more and more insensitive to sin in the process. Anybody remember the 1950s? Did you know there were no movie ratings in the 1950s? You could go see any movie you want. I know you didn't want to send the kids to see something that was the mobsters, and you didn't want them to see the speakeasies or, some of the other kinds of things. And they had their issues, but they didn't go as far as this. But parents knew the difference. By 1960, however, we had an R-rated movie. The rating system came in late 50s, early 60s, and one of the first movies to earn an R rating, you remember it? Peyton Place. Today, we would let our children watch that movie without a thought. There wasn't really anything going on there except what they talked about. And as we've seen the rating system evolve, R has become the new PG-13. X is now MA. Why? Well, we've matured as a society. No, we haven't. We are more immature today than we were then. This society is going backwards morally. And the vast majority of us haven't even noticed. As a septuagenarian, I am amazed at what parents let their young children watch from whatever medium to hand. And with their own smartphones, many parents have no clue what that may be, not to mention the tweeting that goes on and the suggestive images and all the rest of it. What happened? The entertainment medium has become more crass. But in any generation, it was always that way. We can't really blame them. Back in the 20s, the 30s, back in the 1800s, show folks. You didn't want your children hanging around with show folks. They were immoral. Today, we want them hanging around show folks because they're glorious and gorgeous and Just wait till some rock group comes along and gets on television and 80 million kids show up to hear them. I never even heard, I don't know who these people are. They know their song, can sing them all, they're in it. Now we see and we hear politicians, powerful media moguls, business people, and even religious leaders taking advantage of immature, ill-equipped, or vulnerable young boys and girls. And we're shocked. Well, we used to be. Now it has become ordinary. And at the same time, both disgusting and infuriating. We don't like our kids being damaged. Where'd all this come from? Well, you can point to a lot of things, but ultimately it came from the pit of hell. It isn't godly. It isn't decent. Socially, it sprang from the corrupt heart of men and women who have been given greater and greater freedom to follow these kinds of impulses. Put enough money on the table, and young girls and young boys will do almost anything. Depends on their desire. What do they want to do? I want to get ahead. Or maybe they just don't understand how this is all working, because they've seen so much of it glorified, made to look, oh, it's so wonderful, the music's playing and it's soft. And oh, no, it's hideous. They're immature, they're uneducated, inexperienced in the ways of sin. No, they know how to lie, but they don't know this. In the 1960s and 70s, we were rich with all sorts of sexual flaunting and experimentation. Did you know that until 1961, homosexuality in America was against the law? Illegal. But then so were recreational drugs. The generation that grew up in this time period lived an alternate, dangerous lifestyle and never knew it. The adults in their world made sure they didn't see it, didn't understand it. They opened the door and let them walk off the edge of the cliff. And now it is their grandchildren, the grandchildren of these children in the 60s, who are now paying the price. In great part due to the fact that their grandparents saw themselves breaking loose from the rigid constraints of an antiquated religious system. But then came the 1980s. And with the 1980s, casual sex, homosexual sex, experimentation, all the rest of it that had become so suddenly brought with it something called AIDS, acquired immune deficiency. The first highly communicable disease deliberately contracted and deliberately officially ignored. A man arrived, I think it was in Canada, who had this disease. They knew what it was. When Typhoid Mary came along, they isolated her as the source of this disease that was killing people, and they isolated her. When this guy came along with AIDS that would definitely kill people, they didn't do that. And nothing matched this particular epidemic for the speed at which it spread and the certainty with which it was spread, along with the prolonged painful death that it always brought. So what do we do with him? Well, we broke protocol. Not because science had the answer. but because it was not politically correct. There were those in places of responsibility who did not want homosexuality to be stigmatized. So they let this man walk around free. Instead, they announced that as long as you don't come in contact with the patient's bodily fluids, you won't catch it. So now police officers and jailers and doctors and nurses and anybody dealing with the public at large were required, for their own protection, to wear rubber gloves, surgical masks if possible. The infected men, and that's all it was in those days, were given drugs and released into the general population. And we know how that turned out, don't we? Over the next 30 years or so, we seem to get a handle on the disease, but we've never found a cure. And there have been times, horrendous times, when these men have deliberately sought to infect other people, to draw attention to the need for a drug to fix it. And as far as I know, there's still no cure. But today there's no official taboo related to how people contract it. And it continues to ravage men and now women throughout Western civilization. And you say, what happened to the medical community? It's there to protect us. The medical community was co-opted by the politically correct. AIDS is almost exclusively related to homosexual behavior. But we can't turn that into something bad, can we? Otherwise intelligent human beings deliberately opting to put an entire world at risk in order to save their precious political social experiment, which is that sexual intercourse is a natural bodily function. That sexual intercourse between persons of the same gender is also a normal bodily function. And if you dare say otherwise, well, you're a bigot. Oh, by the way, we now do this with transgenderism. You know, that men can be women and vice versa, if that's what they really believe they were supposed to be. We attach no science to this, no chemistry to this, no morality to this, no social construct exists, no physical damage is bad enough, no medical complication is severe enough to stand in the way of people who want to participate. And if you stand up and say, the emperor has no clothes, you're the bigot. Tens of thousands of men, women, and children have died so homosexual men could have fun with one another. It's that simple. Today, homosexuality is socially acceptable, politically popular, legally protected. And it's the critics who are now the problem. We, the critics, are causing these people untold anguish and destructive emotional turmoil because we want our children to be able to grow up in a more safe environment. We know that if they fool around with this thing, they will get sick. They will get hurt. There's damage to their physical organs through this kind of sexual activity. And they can contract deadly diseases. We don't want them to be able to just walk out the front door and get one. Of course, the worst case scenario is if an infected man would deliberately give it to an uninfected young person, old person, whoever it might be, under the guise of just having fun. And there are thousands of those stories, men who have done just that. In some cases for spite. No, I'm not making it up. It was in the news. It was a real deal years ago. You see, the architects of our society want it to be open. We want it to be non-judgmental. We want our society to be free to whomever and whatever it may want. The scourge of homosexuality, bisexuality, along with AIDS, fecal incontinence, along with a host of other infectious and communicable diseases, are not due to the natural evolution of the species. Much of it, most of it, is due to the deliberate destruction of both the body and the soul for personal gain. Not money always, personal gain. Yet in 1986, the American Psychological Association, the American Public Health Association assured the U.S. Supreme Court that, quote, no significant data show that engaging in oral and anal sex results in mental or physical dysfunction. These are men and women who have those physical organs. It wonders some of us why they did not submit to this kind of behavior before they started writing this kind of stupidity. Can you say AIDS? We already had it by that time and knew why. Fecal incontinence, the inability to control your bowels. You gotta wear a diaper or have surgery. Or some of the other diseases you contract when your immune system becomes compromised, unable to fight off anything. We know, left to their own, men are pigs. We know, without divine intervention, the heart is deceitful above all things, beyond anything anybody can imagine. We know that power corrupts, and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. We know that evil ambition knows no bounds. We know no society has ever survived without moral control. So why are we shocked that Lester Moonves may have taken advantage of a young female employee? Or that the Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Church may have sexually abused a young boy? Or that a non-Catholic pastor would have done any of the same sorts of things? Why does that upset us, shock us? The Bible tells us that the human heart is deceitful. How deceitful? Deceitful above all things. Isn't anything on the planet more deceitful than your heart? Not the pump. The heart of your being, the essential you. The thoughts, the conscience, the things, the decisions, the things, that immaterial things that guard and guide and direct your life. And can it be measured? The Bible says no. Deceitful above all things. Who can know it? Totally unmeasurable. Because power always corrupts. And absolute power corrupts how? Absolutely. Sodom and Gomorrah were tame compared to Western society today. They didn't have television. They didn't have internet. They had movies, digital movies. Things like that stirring them, motivating them, giving them ideas. And we in our advanced intellectual whatever keep giving our children smartphones for their protection. Well, I want my child to have a phone. You know, I had a man call me. I was on the radio in Wilmington, North Carolina. Man, call me. Seriously. We were talking about stuff like this. And he says, if somebody shows up in my child's school with a gun, I want my child to have a phone to be able to call me. Well, that was in the days, this is 20 years ago, when that didn't happen very often. But I said to him, I said, listen, If somebody shows up in your child's school with a gun, they're locking down the school. They're cordoning off the school and about 50 yards in every direction. You ain't getting anywhere near that school. Calling you isn't going to do anything. Well, she has to be able to get to her father. 5,000 years, children didn't have phones. Did you have a phone growing up? But now our kids have to have it. You have to pay extra money, go to extra extent to make sure that stuff doesn't just show up on your child's phone. And you can't even be sure of that. Oh, you don't know. I have one. I don't go to any of those sites. I don't do any of that stuff. I fight the battle every day. Internet. Send me an email. I get, 30, 40 spam emails, things that my computer shuts off and puts away. I don't even look to see what they are anymore. Some of them are just outrageous. And I've got as much protection as I can afford. They get through. I just don't understand it. Child could have a pager. You could get to them. Well, they could have a little smart button. Boom, and it would indicate to you and you could go to them. Nope, you got to give them a $600 iPhone so they can access the world. 10 years old. Makes sense, right? Yeah. Welcome to the 21st century. I don't think we're going to survive it. I think the Lord is coming soon.